My name is Nick Oliver. I work at Imperial College in London. Many thanks for asking me to present these data. This audience is very familiar with the DCCT data, where we know very well that intensive glucose control reduces HbA1c and addresses micro and macrovascular risk in people with type 1 diabetes. The DCCT also showed very clearly there's a negative linear relationship between HbA1c and the incidence of troublesome and severe hypoglycemia. So the lower your HbA1c in the DCCT with intensive insulin therapy, the more likely you were to have severe hypoglycemia. Last year, my colleague Marga Jimenez from Barcelona published data in Diabetes Care that showed very nicely that if we look at CGM data, which is able to give us much more granular information about hypoglycemia, we can show very nicely that the relationship between HbA1c and hypoglycemia is not a straight negative linear relationship that was shown in DCCT, but is in fact a J-shape, with the higher risks of hypoglycemia occurring at extremes of HbA1c. So, as we've always thought, people with lower HbA1cs are at higher risk of hypoglycemia, but so are those with higher end HbA1cs, presumably related to increased glucose variability and challenges with insulin administration and self-monitoring. We showed those data using the JDRF cohort from 2008, which, as you'll know, was selected for having people with HbA1c values that were reasonably close to target and included around 50% insulin pump users. In these data, we've revisited the same methodology to look at the relationship between HbA1c and hypoglycemia using CGM data, but in a group of people with HbA1c values higher and above target and on multiple dose injection regimens only. So these data are taken from the Diamond study, which was published in JAMA in 2017. There was 158 adults with type 1 diabetes with an HbA1c above 7.5%, all of whom were using a multiple dose insulin injection regimen. Following blinded baseline CGM, they were randomized to usual care, which was self-monitoring of blood glucose a few times a day, or continuous glucose monitoring using the Dexcom Gen 5 device. So what we've done is to take the baseline data of HbA1c and the blinded CGM and looked at time below 3.9 or 70 milligrams per deciliter and plotted that against HbA1c with the best curve fit that we can find. In this case, these are quadratic regression plots. Alongside that, we've plotted the HbA1c and hypoglycemia time for both the self-monitored blood glucose group here in panel A in the middle, and for the CGM group, just by my head there, panel B for the CGM group. So you can see that, as we showed from the JDRF study, there is a hint of a J shape here at baseline. This is slightly shorter, I should say, because people in the Diamond study were selected for an HbA1c between 7.5 and 9.5, so these are reasonably small. But then you can see at the end of the 24 weeks of the study, there's widened out as people's HbA1cs have changed over time, and similarly in the CGM group. So there are a few things to point out about these. So the first thing to say is that, as you'd expect, the control group had some benefit from being in a clinical study, from some of the education and support they had, and they showed some reductions in HbA1c. But as you'll remember from the Diamond study, there was a significantly greater reduction in HbA1c in the CGM group. Both groups have a slight change in the shape of their relationship between HbA1c and time in hypoglycemia, and both seem to flatten out a little with slightly reduced slope. The y-axes on both are the same, and you can see that the time in hypoglycemia below 70 is around 5 to 10% in the self-monitored blood glucose group, but is predominantly below 5% in the CGM group, consistent with the significant reduction in time spent below target in the Diamond study. But what you can really show here is that attempts to intensify overall HbA1c and glucose control with CGM result in an ability to move your HbA1c from the lowest point here. If you were around 7.5, you had around 8% time in hypoglycemia. And if you moved your HbA1c down and you were down into these targets down here, your time in hypoglycemia did not go up. So consistent with the data that Marga Jimenez published last year, you're able with CGM to adjust your HbA1c and to intensify your glucose control, even with the multiple dose injection regimen. And that's the important thing about the Diamond study. These are people outside of target on a multiple dose injection regimen. You're able to address your HbA1c without a significant increase in time spent in hypoglycemia. So the data that we have from the DCCT, that belief that we have that intensification increases the risk of hypoglycemia, is something that we need to reconsider, revisit, and think again about, because we have technologies and we have the ability now to address HbA1c without increasing the risk of hypoglycemia. We've done a similar thing with the HypoDE study that Dr. Herman's just presented, and we'll later this year be presenting a combined manuscript with all of those analyses and more detail. And thank you very much.